In this episode, I interview author and high performance coach Ryan Munsey. We discuss high performance mindset, defining and aligning your values, proper context to your feelings, and addressing obstacles in your life. And the key aspect that is across any vertical when it comes to high performance, whether it's fitness, business, or your personal life. So listen, take notes, and enjoy. All right, before we jump into the episode, just wanted to share some information about Anchor. It's a great free platform for starting out a podcast. It's what I've been using, and it was a great turnkey solution for me to be able to focus on the primary mission of my podcast and not worry as much about how to get the word out, where to post, things of that nature. Anchors takes care of that for you. They distribute, they set up a platform that is easy to use with lots of tutorials. They give recommendations and coaching on how to even interview on your podcast to get you started. So I would encourage you to look into it, download the free Anchor app, or go to anchor.fm to get started. Now, on to the episode. Okay, welcome to another episode of the Rest and Recovery Podcast. Today's guest is Ryan Munsey, author of F Your Feelings, creator and host of the Better Human Project podcast, which is pursuing what it means to operate at a high level of performance in wellness and in personal development space. Welcome to the podcast, Ryan.
It's my pleasure, Scott. Thanks for having me on.
Well, again, thanks for joining. Look forward to digging into the book a little bit and kind of the key tenets around the book. But before we dig into that, just kind of wanted to get a little feel for your background, your personal evolution to this point with the two things I mentioned with the Better Human Project and your recent book.
Yeah, so I'll go back to college, and I'll try to speed through the bio as quickly as possible so it's not boring for folks. But if there's anything you want to stop and dig into, I'll let you, take the lead on that.
Yeah.
I grew up in Southwest Virginia, Roanoke, and I played sports my whole life until I got to college. I wasn't good enough to play in school. I went to Clemson University, and if you follow college football, you know that they're pretty high level. So I wasn't quite that good of an athlete, but my best friend from home was a year younger than me, and he was actually on the track team at Clemson, and he was a very successful high jumper. He actually won the ACCs 7 out of 8 times.
Wow.
That's counting indoor and outdoor seasons, so 2 seasons a year. So I was actually able to kind of tag along with him at track practice, and that's where I really learned performance training. I learned sprint technique from the coaches who were, really teaching guys that actually sprinted for Team USA in the Olympics, and I just got to soak it all up. And, I eventually changed majors. I wanted to do exercise physiology, but Clemson didn't have that. The closest I could get was food science and human nutrition, which is a dietetics degree. If I did the internship after school, I would have been a registered dietitian. I did not want to pursue that route. I didn't want to work in a clinical setting. I also disagreed with everything that we were taught in school. In that curriculum, you have the science, and then you have the nutrition classes. And what you learn in the nutrition classes, those curriculums are paid for and funded by big food, big pharma, and you're taught, all things fit, and there are no bad foods, and you're taught things that just don't mesh with the science that you took. I took, you name the science, I took it: biochem, organic, regular chem, biology, anatomy, physiology, all that stuff. So I know how the body works, and it just didn't match with the science. And so, I didn't want to pay to be a dietitian and then to have to spend the rest of my career protecting that board certification and, basically being a puppet and saying what they wanted me to say so that I could keep that label. And so from there, when I graduated, I had the opportunity to move to New York and do some work as a fitness model. I did that It was not what I expected it to be, so that didn't last very long. Less than a year, moved back to Roanoke and worked as a personal trainer at a big box facility for a few years until I'd had enough and said, I can do this better on my own. 2012, I opened my own performance training facility called House of Strength. Strength coach, writing for places like Men's Fitness, Men's Health, some online magazines and websites that got a lot of traffic. Working with athletes at the high school, college level, and then also general population adults. Sold that in the end of 2015, going into 2016. And, I really wanted to be able to reach a wider audience. But, as we were kind of talking about before we hit record, I kind of reached a point where I was no longer interested in the X's and O's and the programming. And, I just didn't care how many burpees an adult needed to do on Tuesday to correct what they did on Saturday. I was more interested in the conversation of why are your actions on Friday night and Saturday night not aligned with the goals that you have when you come to me.
Right.
So I really wanted to be able to explore those questions. And that was really the kind of the genesis of the foray into trying to figure out human performance from the psychological standpoint. I felt like I had an understanding of the physiological standpoint. And so, all of that kind of culminated 2 years later in the book, as you said, F Your Feelings. I'm going to take your lead and assume not to cuss. So I'm going to do my best. If one slips, I apologize.
Yeah, that's all right. We're all adults, but
But I spent the next 2 years, interviewing Olympic athletes and special forces operators and researchers, cognitive behavioralists, and really trying to put those pieces together. And the book is, my attempt to understand, what's going on between our ears. Why do we feel the way we feel? Why do those feelings drive our decisions? Why is it so tough to be a human sometimes? And, it's been an incredible ride since the book came out. I don't really know, at this point, I don't remember what my expectations are, but the success of the book and the reach has surpassed my expectations. And it's been a really fun journey to, hear all the success stories and be able to interact with all the people who have, read the book and come back and say, wow, this has helped me tremendously. And I've got dads that love it and they're buying it for their kids or, buying it for their wives, and military and law enforcement personnel are using it and they're teaching others with it, and it's just been a really cool experience.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's a great story. It's an interesting anecdote for me, is the evolution of a person, kind of what you're saying, and observing people in high performance states. You mentioned the time at Clemson, your friend, and then the people around him, and then as you evolved in other pursuits with engaging with people at that same level. Did you see kind of any consistent themes when you look at those that are high performance or those that are not there yet? Because we mentioned mindset. So what's the gap?
I think, the simplest way to talk about it is the ability to flip a switch. And that can come in a lot of different tangible examples, right? But at the end of the day, I work with people who are in real estate. I work with a client right now who's in bodybuilding. I work with, some folks that are in the outdoor industry. And, to what we were discussing before we hit record, it doesn't matter what your pursuit. It doesn't matter if you're in any of those verticals, or if you're in track and field, or if you're in, business as an entrepreneur. The people who I have seen be successful are the people who simply refuse to allow obstacles to stand in their way. They're people who do whatever it takes to get it done. And I know that's a very trite, very cliche kind of thing. But, I always tell people you can have excuses or you can have results. You can't have both. And, so many people, to use your words, that aren't there yet, find ways of letting themselves off the hook. They rationalize things. They make decisions based on how they feel in any given moment, right? And that's the reason for the title of the book. So there's a cognitive neuroscientist named Antonio Damasio, and this is in the book, so I won't go into it too much, but he figured out that about 95% of our decisions are made based on how we feel in any given moment. And armed with that knowledge, it's pretty easy to see why so many people struggle to get from A to Z. The larger our goal, the more audacious our goal, the longer it's going to take us to get there. And the more we expand that timeline required to get somewhere, the more micro decisions we have to make along the way, the more opportunities there are for feelings to jump up and say, dude, I don't feel like getting up at 4 a.m. to go to my workout. I don't feel like eating another salad. I don't feel like meal prepping. I don't feel like making these calls that I have to make for my business. Maybe your business is getting hit hard right now and you don't feel like filling out that small business application, for the bailout or whatever's going on. The people who are successful are the people who do the things required to get the results that they're looking for, regardless of how they feel. And so when I say flipping the switch, that's really what I'm talking about, is can you go to that place and do what you know is required, regardless of how you feel in that moment?
Yeah, no, that's a key element. I mean, I can relate, I do some endurance sports, and there's plenty of times where that morning alarm goes off and I want to hit snooze. I feel tired, but there's times where I will hit it, and then the level of guilt and shame internally. But then there's also the other side when I realize I push through that, and then I go out and have a good run. Then it's like, it's a building block towards positive momentum.
Well, you're going to have a building block, or you're when that alarm goes off, you're going to initiate a cycle one way or the other. Right. And if you hit snooze, or if you turn it off and you stay in bed, the whole rest of your day, like you said, we start to assign guilt or shame or all those negative feelings. And then we start to, tell ourselves, oh, I'm worthless. And, oh, I didn't do this. And I don't do what I'm supposed to do. And then that spirals. The next time you have a decision later on in that day, maybe it's a phone call you're supposed to make. You're like, oh, I can just do that tomorrow. All of that snowballs. And like you said, if you decide to get up and you go do the thing, whatever it is, whether it's a run or just getting up at the right time. And, like we're talking now during quarantine, so many folks are using this as an excuse to, not shower or, not put on their clothes, stay in your pajamas. And, that builds and that perpetuates. So one of the other things we talk about in the book is that feelings are mental experiences of physiological states. And so physiological state is just your body state. So essentially what's going on from your neck down can impact what's going on between your ears. And, if we're lethargic and we're laying around and we're not doing anything, right, we start to cultivate that kind of cloudy, standing water, kind of murky, physiology. Couple that with, I didn't do this, I didn't do that, I didn't do that. It's a very dangerous kind of storm that creates that negative spiral, and it's very hard to break. And that's why, to your point, every single morning when that alarm goes off, you're going to start one of those cycles, either positive or negative. And you kind of have one moment to decide how that's going to go. And, one of the little tricks that I like to do, to kind of capitalize on that, understanding the importance of that singular moment, is simply putting my alarm out of reach. Like, I cannot touch my alarm from laying in bed. I actually have to physically get out of bed and go turn it off. And that significantly reduces the odds of hitting snooze or turning it off and going and getting back into bed. Yeah, I'm not going to say I've never done that, but it significantly reduces it.
Yeah. It's kind of hard to kind of snuggle back into bed there and get in that warm spot again. And when once you're up, it's just, all right, momentum, right? It's kind of inertia.
Yep.
So you mentioned mindset. So the word perspective or context seems to kind of come to mind for me on how you view things. Um, how much of that is, you know, related to the goal you're setting for yourself or the attempt to get there?
So I'm not sure that this is exactly the answer, or I'm not sure this is a question. I'm not sure I'm answering your question exactly, but when you say context and you also brought up goal, I always talk to folks about goal and context. And as a society, we have a tendency to be very binary. We want blanket statements. We want people to say, this food is good or this food is bad. This exercise is great or this exercise is terrible. You should never do this exercise.
Yeah.
And if you just scroll through, Google and look at headlines, or if you scroll through social media, those types of headlines are what get clicks and eyeballs. Because our attention spans are short and we have more and more things fighting for our attention. So it's very easy. Our minds are actually designed to kind of compartmentalize and stereotype because it's an exercise in economy, efficiency. If you meet me, you want the 30-second synopsis of who I am, but that's far from the whole or the real me, but it gives you a quick idea, to be able to say, like, okay, that's who this person is. And for anybody that you might come across. Right. And so a lot of these headlines and marketers and things like that understand psychology and sociology, and they capitalize on that. But beyond that, back to, I'm kind of going off on a tangent, but the point is we have a propensity to be very binary, black and white, yes or no. And I get tons of questions, is cold exposure good? Should I do endurance training? Pick your thing. Is keto good? Right. Yeah. All these questions. And I always come back to, well, it depends. Right. And it depends on the two words you use, goal and context. Right. What are you trying to accomplish? And what's the context in which, we're having this conversation? And so, let's use keto as an example. You might come to me and say, or the average question is, is keto good? Well, I don't know. Like, it's an effective tool, but I don't know if it's right for you and your goals and your situation right now. So now let's look at two different scenarios where, I might be trying to compete in the CrossFit games. And if that's the case, keto is a terrible way for me to eat. But if you are, an endurance athlete and, you're never going over a certain exertion level, everything that you're doing is basically in that aerobic zone, and you're always under a heart rate of, say, 140, keto might be an amazing fuel source for you, and it might be a great way to eat.
Right.
So that's where, we have to get away from. So even to say we have to get away from is sort of binary. So the way I try to say it is be less binary,
right?
And start to account for goal and context in all of these conversations. The problem is it makes the conversations much more lengthy, and it doesn't give people that immediate yes or no answer that they're looking for. It puts responsibility and accountability back in everybody's court. And a lot of people are just trying to, shirk those things these days.
Yeah. You hit on a great point that, I've talked about before. Yeah, it's definitely more of a degrees discussion and many things that we do, and the why behind it, the context, like you said. If your goal, you're given the endurance person versus the CrossFit, you've got a completely different chemistry activity going on. Or if you're just the person who's trying to get well from a ground zero to improve on their total wellness, it might be a good tool, keto, for a short term, but is that a lifestyle?
Right.
And then the other thought I had was, I often say it'll be kind of cross currents of life, because there's so many different things that coexist at the same time that may seem at odds with one another, but they're still existing as true facts, depending on the moment, if that's clear.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the scientific terms that pops into my head around that is cognitive dissonance. And that's kind of the ability to hold two opposing beliefs in your head at the same time. We see that all the time with smokers. And we're seeing it right now with coronavirus, right? So, the smoker has, that understanding that, hey, smoking causes cancer, smoking kills people. But the guy that goes outside and lights up a cigarette right now is also saying that's not going to happen to me. He truly believes that that's not going to happen to him.
Right.
With coronavirus, we know that going outside and being in public places increases our risk of exposure. But a lot of people are going out and saying, I'm not going to get it, or it's not going to happen to me. Right. Maybe they won't. And it doesn't make either of those less true. So yeah, you're right. I mean, there are a lot of those dualities that exist. And, if we live in that binary space, it becomes very difficult to understand and have perspective, as you said earlier, on other people's differing viewpoints, and that leads to a lot of arguments and confrontations and fights, and, people not being able to understand that somebody else can have another viewpoint, and it doesn't necessarily make one of you wrong.
Right. Yeah. Well, you can see it in many domains, like you said, even around the COVID situation. You've got a variety of medical research being thrown around from different angles, saying the severity of it. So you have a degrees discussion, and then also politically, right? It turns into either or when there's so many variables that make each circumstance true and not true at the same time. So speaking of this kind of yin and yang, so to speak, where you have multiple contributing factors, but ultimately in decision making, it kind of is a binary thing. So they're both kind of coexist. Does that make sense? Like you've got, say, 5 or 6 different contributing factors to a particular decision, but you have to make a left or right choice at the fork. So at some point when you're dealing with, the development of a person or coaching, how do you put that in there? Is it like temporarily permanent decision and you experiment?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I give you credit. I don't think anybody's asked me about this on the podcast, at least to my memory. But I think I'll go to a conversation I've had with, I mentioned one of my clients earlier who's in the bodybuilding space. And, in the bodybuilding space, there are 2 different camps for training. And there are a lot of people who, this is my program. This is what I'm going to do regardless. It says, it's leg day. I got to go in and I have to do these exercises. And this is the program. And then there's another camp that goes on what they would call instinctive or intuitive training. And the problem is, to be very successful at the instinctive or intuitive training, you have to be emotionally detached from the process and the outcome. And it's very difficult for the average person to get to that point, especially with a pursuit that, in the health and fitness or business space, we have so much tied up in, not only our identity, but I mean, if it's a business, you have your livelihood tied up into that. So it's very difficult to be emotionless and to be rational in those decisions. And so,
Sure.
To your point, like with your question, so, you wake up and today is on the training plan, like it's a lift day and you're supposed to go, let's pretend like we're not on quarantine right now. And you're supposed to go to the gym and you're supposed to do leg day and you're supposed to, try to squat, a new PR for 8 reps. But you wake up and, your nervous system is drained and your back is tight and you want to go lift, but your body isn't in a place where you should put a bar on your back and try to squat heavy. So, being able to remove the emotion from that decision and actually not training, or maybe you go for a walk, you somehow modify the training so that you're not trying to set a PR. And, the worst case scenario is you go in and you do what you're supposed to do and you get hurt. And
Right.
Now you're set back 6 weeks, or, God forbid you do something to your back and now you've got a lingering thing that you have to fight on and off for the rest of your life. that's part of the gray area, again, if to continue our conversation of kind of degrees and being less binary. The question is still yes or no. Do you go in and train? Or yes or no, do you stick to the program? Maybe it's no, you don't stick to the program, but you go in and you do, some light work to kind of loosen up your back, or you do some movement. And that's one of those things where there's definitely an art and a science to this. And, I would say to the person who's kind of in the beginning stages of their journey, understand that the more you can remove the emotional connection to both the process and the outcome, the faster you can get to that point. If you're in doubt about how to approach that, talk to your coach, your mentor, somebody who's been through that before, because experience is one of the best teachers, and those individuals might be able to help you through that decision-making matrix.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely seems, even my own personal pursuits, it takes a while. To your point, if you're just starting out, you're not going to know your body and the response yet, but talk it out. And I know that's always for years. Heck, that was even the genesis of starting this podcast, is I didn't listen to my body and would crash and burn a little too often. But there's so many different dynamic elements to that, whether it's, your life outside that effort, whether it's your business. So what's your family dynamic, what you're eating, like what's, all the other variables that are influencers to your overall, countenance.
Yeah. And that's bringing it full circle to goal and context, right? Like if you're, again, we'll use that same example earlier of, if you're trying to compete in the CrossFit games and, maybe you're a paid and sponsored athlete, and, there's a huge potential upside to you going into the gym that day and pushing it. Whereas if that's not the case, for most people, you've got to consider, are you going to be able to show up for your family later that day or later in the week? Or, how is this going to impact your business? If you're a small business owner, or, your ability to show up and work,
Yeah.
So bringing that full circle to kind of goal and context, like, all of those things have to be considered, and bringing all that back to, this researcher, Antonio Damasio, he had a patient, this guy's name was Elliot, who had a tumor removed from his prefrontal cortex. And when the tumor was removed, there was some damage done to his brain. And that damage prevented him from being able to weigh all of those little micro decisions that we're throwing out as hypotheticals that impact our ability to, make that one decision of, should we go train today? This guy, Elliot, and this is how Damasio arrived at the conclusion for his research, was that, this guy, Elliot, couldn't even make a decision like where to go eat for lunch, because he couldn't assign value to all those little micro decisions that we're bringing up and throwing out.
So along that lines, how does one who's starting out or recognizes, hey, I want to improve my decision-making, develop that mental strength, that mental fortitude to make that better decision when they come up to those life choices, when it comes to, many of the folks listening are probably, the average mom and dad out there working, pursuing fitness goals, but, it's for a broader, well-lived life.
So I've got a couple of tools that we talk about in the book, and, two of them that come to mind as you're asking that question. One would be an exercise that I call act as if. And then the other one is going to be choice architecture. So we'll run through both of those, and I'll give you a couple of examples. So the act as if is really an exercise in defining your values. And, I'm really lucky that I get to talk leadership and work with, some high level companies and teams that are focused on high performance. And what I always find interesting in those settings is if I go into those rooms and I ask the people at the table or in these meetings and say, look, take out a piece of paper and write down this company or this team's values. And everybody can pull out a paper, and maybe they get it, maybe not 100%, but they know like 80 to 90% of whatever those company core values are.
Kind of directionally correct.
Yeah. And then I say, okay, pull out another piece of paper and write down your individual values. What are your values as a person? And everybody just kind of looks around and they're like, well, I've never done that. And so that's my point in that exercise, is to say, look, what these are for the business or the company that pays you, but you don't know what your values are as a person, as an individual. And so, the exercise becomes, let's define your values. Who are you? What do you stand for? What do you stand against? How do you want to be remembered? How do you want to move through the world? How do you want to show up for the people that you care about? And those are all just kind of questions that serve as a cue to get you thinking and coming up with some answers. And so, we do this in our Better Human workshops. I talk people through it in the book. I can actually send you a link. I've got a video that walks people through it as well.
Yeah, I'll include that in the show notes.
Okay. And so what I really want is, if you're listening to this, press pause and try to figure out what those values are for yourself. And the way we do the exercise is, I'll have people write out 5 or 10 words that come to your mind. And so, Scott, I see you taking notes, and maybe you're writing down the questions that are cues, or maybe you're writing down words. But as we say those questions that serve as cues, most people have a flood of words that come into their mind. And I want all those words on a piece of paper. No filtering, just no editing, just put them all down. And then once you have all those words, you can go back through and pick three words that you want other people to use when they talk about you, right? How do you want to be remembered? How do you want other people to describe you? And those 3 words will tell us a lot about what's important to you. And one thing to keep in mind is that we're in a particular season of our lives now and always. And so if you do this exercise again in a year or in 2 years, you may come up with 3 different words, and that's okay. But the point is, these values will stay with you far longer than your feelings. And so feelings are short-term, transient ways of being. The way you feel right now is different than the way you're going to feel in 3 hours, in 3 days, and in 3 weeks. And as we already said, if your feelings drive your decisions, good luck getting to that outcome that you want. But if you act according to your values, then your decisions, your choices, your actions are going to be far more consistent and significantly more aligned with who you want to be and how you want to move through the world. And so that's the first exercise. The second one is choice architecture. And another word for this that scientists use is called the Ulysses Pact. And this has to do with I'm drawing a blank on it. The Iliad, all right?
Yeah.
And so Odysseus or Ulysses, same character, depending on which one you read, is captaining his ship. He knows that they're about to sail past the sirens that sing a song and lure the ships in. They go into shallow water and they crash on the rocks. And so knowing that that's coming, he instructs his crew to fill their ears with wax and to tie him to the mast of the ship. And he says, anybody who unties me before we get past a certain point will die by my sword. So he basically immobilizes himself so that he can't steer towards the sirens. And he puts, hearing, he reduces his crew's ability to hear the siren songs and be tempted. So in other words, this Ulysses Pact or choice architecture is a mental strategy where we can take what we know about the temptations or the scenarios that we know we're going to face soon, and we can make a pact with ourselves, or we can set something up that puts us in puts our future self in a better position to succeed. And I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to see if you can come up with this, but I already told you one of these that I do. It's part of what I do when I wake up.
Oh, you're quizzing me. Um,
Ours,
you
ours,
removed the alarm away from arm reach. I
exactly.
remembered.
Exactly. So that is an example of choice architecture. At night, I know that in the morning, if I have to get out of bed to turn off my alarm, I'm significantly increasing my odds of waking up and starting my day the way I want to start my day.
Right.
So, that's a really cool, like, that's an example of, a very powerful um, mindset trick. I mean, neuroscientists and behavioralists actually call this choice architecture. So, it could be as simple as just, doing your meal prep. And then that way, tomorrow your meals are ready. There's tons of ways that we can put these into play. But I think those two things will get a person very, very far along. If you can act according to your values and look for ways that you can set up better default choices, throughout your life, those two things are going to get you miles ahead.
No, that's great. Great feedback. I mean, I had two thoughts on that when you were speaking. One of them was feelings are kind of like indicator lights on the dashboard.
Mhm.
It's a warning sign, but it's not an absolute definitive answer. It may be something you need to check, and it could be a false alarm. Sometimes you get that thing on the dashboard and turns out it's nothing. It's a sensor and it's misfiring. So if you relate that to feelings, your feelings can sense something, but they may overreact or respond to whatever that
Yep.
catalyst is.
You're 100% correct. And that's actually what their biological purpose is. Feelings have survived evolution for a reason, and we need them. They actually serve, as you said, as kind of that alert on the dashboard. They are they're something that directs our attention to a signal within all of the noise. And from an evolutionary standpoint, being able to identify that signal in the noise was what kept us alive. And
Right.
if you now look at the world we live in today, we have significantly more noise, and it's significantly harder to identify the signal from the noise. So, we may be, to kind of use your analogy, is like, it's kind of like you're in a cockpit with this dashboard of, lights, and everything's just kind of going off because it's like, I don't know what to pay attention to.
Right.
And so developing this awareness, this, ability to say, okay, I know that this is going off. Why is this going off? Is this something I need to pay attention to? Or, can I move on and, focus on something else or whatever? And so, awareness is one of the other major steps in this journey for us.
And it seems like we've used the word before as context, and recognizing the dashboard is not the same as the steering wheel, right? They're two different functional tools. And so the lights may be giving you an indication, but also and so that's your feelings, but you're in control of the steering wheel, and you're going to choose what to do with that. And so don't let the indicator light drive the plane or the car.
I like that. I might have to steal it.
What is a key takeaway, or one or two key takeaways? We touched on a few for somebody starting out. What would be like the first two things to do?
Yeah. So I think really start with the define your values exercise that we just talked about. And, I got so excited about that one that I forgot to tell you, why I say act as if. And so, to finish out that exercise, when I have people look at those three words, I always ask the question, what is stopping you from being that version of you right now? And inevitably, I always get one of two answers, either nothing or me. And in either case, we all have the ability to act accordingly. You can act as if you already are that version of you right now and at all times. So, that's why it's called act as if. And so, to answer your question of where to get started, I would say the define your values exercise. And then, at the end of that last kind of line of conversation, I mentioned awareness being crucial. Awareness affords us choice. And if we can bring in awareness to these things, if we can start kind of working on, if you're a meditator or if you're a yogi, you're familiar with kind of the objective view. or if you're not familiar with that, the witness perspective. Imagine being in an airplane and you have this 30,000 foot view looking down on yourself, and you can see, what you're doing and how you're moving through the world. That awareness, if we learn to cultivate that in real time, it affords us a choice in the moment. Do we want to continue that way, or do we want to choose according to our values? And so, the first step is knowing what those values are, knowing how we want to move through the world. And then the second step would be bringing an awareness to, everything that we're doing. And, in those moments of awareness, choosing to either continue or make a change based on, our value set, not our, feelings or emotions.
Great. So final couple questions to close things out, more on a personal front. So what are you reading right now?
Oh man, I will send you a picture of this one. You might actually like it. It's called Endure. I'm in a blank. The guy's name is, if I get this wrong, I apologize. I believe his name is Alex Hutchinson. And the subtitle is Mind, Body, and the Curious Elasticity of Human Potential, or something like that.
Yeah, I think I remember seeing that before.
The foreword is
with
written,
a gentleman running.
Yep, he's on a track running, and the foreword is written by Malcolm Gladwell. That's what sold me on it.
Okay.
It's like, this sounds cool. And then I saw foreword by Malcolm Gladwell. I'm like, all right, I'll listen. Yeah,
I'm all in with that. Great. So what are you listening to right now, music or podcast?
Music, because I just worked out a little while ago. But I have been listening to a few podcasts. I'm a big hunter, and I've been listening to a few hunting related podcasts. I'm supposed to be going on a black bear hunt the first week of May in Montana, but travel is a little iffy right now. So
you might be
that's
walking.
Not looking good.
Yeah. Is your go-to rest and recovery method?
Breathwork. And the reason that I say that is because we can do that one anywhere and anytime. We are always breathing. And, I love gratitude journals. I love cold exposure. I love all of the tools that we can put in our toolbox, but they're not as easily accessible as breathing. If you think about what makes cold exposure so great, you've got to go to your breath.
Right.
Gratitude journaling. Maybe I'm driving and I can't pull out a notebook and write. So breathing is the one that I think is the go-to, because you can do it anywhere and anytime.
Yeah. That's a new one for me. And I not that you need my concurrence, but since it's a new tool, it's I would completely agree with, you can really change your state regardless of the environment, especially now when we're dealing with some new things and how to process that well. Equipping yourself with some breathing techniques is a great one. Ryan, grateful for the time, man. It was a great conversation. Some really good practical information on, how to, own your feelings and mindset, and grateful for the time.
Scott, thank you, man.
Hey, thanks for listening to this episode with Ryan Munsey. I hope you got a lot of value out of it. Remember to check out his website at ryanmunsey.com, as well as his podcast, The Better Human Project. If you did get value out of this, please, we would appreciate a share, like, and a 5-star rating. So remember to check that, whether it's Apple Podcast, Anchor, or whatever platform you're listening to. Again, grateful for your time. Remember, be rested, be well.